So real quick, in yesterday's video, I said the Mavs hide Luka on defense. I shouldn't have said that. He's been better. And also, I said they played the Raptors. They haven't played the Raptors at all. So, a couple of mistakes on my part. Anyway, if we talk about the Nets' first game with James Harden, KD and Harden were great. The offense overall was pretty alright. The game itself, I mean, they really won it in the last 3 minutes. It was pretty close between them and Orlando. I mainly want to focus on the defense because that was the big question with this team. We'll get into the offense. The little preview is a lot of James Harden pick and roll, some off-ball action for KD, some KD pick and roll as well. But James Harden was running the show. Not a big surprise there, right? Anyway, defensively, I think the thing that I noticed the most was the Nets, at times they were switch everything, and at times they were kind of reluctant to switch, and instead they would choose to fight over a screen, or I don't know if they were really trapping ball handlers at any time, but there was a couple times where they brought more attention to the ball. They chose to collapse on Vucevic post-ups, kinda. It wasn't ever really enough to hinder Vuce, but it was maybe enough to where it would force him to pass out every now and then. He did make a bunch of tough shots against them. A lot of his offense was pick and pops, and that's a bit of a question. DeAndre Jordan, can he guard the better offensive centers in the league? I mean, there were a number of possessions where Vuce, again, pick and pop. He beat DJ on a couple of post-ups. And there were also a few times where there was some Terrence Ross, a pin down set by Vuce, and then Ross would get moving, and then it was KD and DJ would commit to Ross going to the basket, but then nobody would be out there for Vuce, so then KD would have to close out. And it's that's the type of scenario where it's well, you could switch that. It would lead to KD defending Vuce, and there was at least one possession I remember where that happened in the post, and I'm pretty sure Vucevic was successful because he made basically every shot he attempted last night. And that's just going to be a bit of a question. I mean, you can take that and you can stretch it out to a team like Philly. Are they going to try to switch everything and just be content with whoever on Embiid? Or are they going to try to do everything they can to where it's always DJ on Embiid? Now, as I say all this, there were also possessions, mainly late in the game that I remember, where they had no center out there. It was Jeff Green at the 5, and to me, it seemed like they had more freedom defensively, where they didn't have to be well, we can't do this because then DJ is going to get caught on somebody or whatever. It was a little bit more of switching and trapping ball handlers, and they were a little more chaotic, but in a good way with their closeouts. And I mean, there's a chance that the advanced numbers do not back this up at all, but to me, it just seemed like something that has more potential than just DeAndre Jordan at center. Because even if you are switching basically everything, or actually everything, and you have a wing player on Vuce or whatever, when you have just 5 perimeter guys, it makes it easier to just collapse on him. And then, you have to dare your guys to close out onto shooters. And, Vuce is a good passer, and Embiid has gotten better as a passer. Bam is an amazing passer. If you try a similar thing against Giannis, Giannis has improved on his passing, although Giannis doesn't really do back-to-the-basket post-ups as much as I would like him to do. But the point being is, that's another thing you're going to have to get really good at, is then recognizing, well, who's open, who do we have to close out on, and all that stuff. And I think, as far as last night was concerned, I don't even know if they were super-duper successful with the small stuff, but it just seemed like something that they can really build on. Now, that said, I do still think they need to acquire another center, or another forward who can defend. And they don't have a whole lot of assets left, but I went over it in that previous video. There's some free agent stuff like that. Yeah, I guess that's my take defensively. The other thing I would say is, in general, it seemed like the activity was pretty good. The miscommunications were a real thing, and it did lead to some open jumpers, mainly from Vuce again. I mean, Terrence Ross made some tough shots on them. They dared Terrence Ross to make a couple mid-rangers, and he did. And so, yeah, I guess just the question that I have after this first game for them defensively is, what is going to be their go-to on defense? Is it going to be, we just clog up the paint? Because it did seem like there were a few possessions where they were a little more content with giving Orlando some threes. As in, when there would be a drive, a wing player would be okay with kind of creeping in a little bit more. Or is it going to be more like we switch everything? Is it going to be playing small? Is it going to be trying to stick with a big guy out there as much as possible? We'll just have to see. Of course, Orlando does not have a great isolation perimeter player, so against a team that is going to go at certain players a little more often, it'll be different. As far as Harden specifically on defense, I got to be honest, there wasn't anything super noticeable to me, good or bad. Actually, there were some good moments. He was fighting around some screens, and I thought his closeouts were pretty okay. To me, in terms of learning where Harden is really at defensively for this team, I don't know if the Magic was going to be the best test for that, just because, again, so much of what they do is run through Vooch, where a lot of teams, it's a point guard, it's a two guard, that sort of thing. So anyway, if we can now get to the offense. I mentioned that Harden was the primary guy. KD still had his fair share of ISOs, and there were at least a decent number of pin down screens for KD to get working into the mid-range and that sort of thing. Joe Harris had a couple of interesting off-ball sets. One early on where he had a cut to the basket off of a DJ screen. He had one in the fourth quarter, I believe. It might have been their first play of the fourth, where he just got basically a floppy set for an open three. I feel like that's pretty normal. I guess that was what was to be expected. Harden run a bunch of pick and rolls. I don't think it was too many ISOs for Harden. He had a step back at the end of the third quarter, I think it was, to go for a 2-for-1, which is, that's pretty typical Harden. When they staggered the two of them, it did look more like the Houston offense, but even then it was still more screens with Reggie Perry and Jeff Green and that sort of thing. Not so much of just Harden dribble the air out of the ball. There was some off-ball action pretty early on. I mean, in fact, the first play of the game, it was a DJ post-up, and then they had Harden moving from the top of the key to, the elbow off of, a Joe Harris screen, and that's actually kind of interesting. That's the sort of thing where defenses are going to have a moment of, oh, crap, what do we do? If James Harden and Joe Harris are screening for each other off the ball, the most logical thing to do would just be to switch, but depending on how you do that, and if you do it fast enough, you can definitely get yourself some open looks off of that sort of thing. Now, I don't think they ran that too often, but it was interesting to see that be the first play of the game for them. Besides that, it was basically just Harden and KD being themselves. KD had a couple of contested threes where he just shot it in transition without thinking about it. We had a couple Harden step backs. We had a whole bunch of Harden free throws where he was just getting inside, and then Harden was just dishing it out to open shooters. That's basketball 101, but that's how it is when it's superstars. It's very easy to describe what they're doing. And that is kind of all I've got on this game. It's only one game, so all I can really do is start to project moving forward. I don't know if it's going to be possible for them to get a better defensive center than DJ. It would be nice if they had one who could at least be more mobile, so when you're up against a guy like Vooch, you're not going to have as much trouble. But again, going small is the way that you can kind of deal with that, but then of course you got to deal with the post, and then the hope is, collapse onto him, close out to shooters, hope for the best. I think they're going to need a big forward, which was kind of something I brought up before when I was speculating on if they can play defense in that video. Could a guy like Rondae have made a big difference? Could he defend Vooch in the post, or at least help out when you don't want DJ in there? Yeah, it's possible. As of right now, I think that mainly falls on KD, Jeff Green, and again, you just think about in a series against Philly or Miami, the Bucks, if Giannis gets in the post, that could be tough to deal with. Against the Celtics, it's not so bad because their centers are not that threatening on offense. So yeah. But at the end of the day, they still had Harden and KD, so they won.